All right. It is time. Amy, we have done 226 episodes, I think,
Oh,
right? And we are finally going to talk about parasites. The boogity boogities. Um, do we want to first talk a little bit about why it took us 226 episodes to talk about parasites? It's a
yeah,
little wild, isn't it?
yeah, it really is.
This is
Um,
overdue, people. We
it is
admit it's
overdue.
overdue.
It is overdue. And I think again, parasites always come up. And I think you're right. There's just they give much more of like a like an ick. There's an ick more when you say parasite than like I don't know. Bacteria is still like I don't know because people talk about good bacteria, bad bacteria. Like I feel like it's a
Yeah.
little bit more. But like, ooh, you
Taboo.
say parasite, it's like, ooh, it just gives you the willies, and you just immediately think of something like gross, something weird under a microscope, wiggling around. Like, I just think you
Yeah.
immediately go to something
I think there's the
foreign and
ick.
that we don't understand.
I think it's
Like,
the ick factor. And I think there's also like a little bit of taboo. And we'll get into this as we talk about the parasites and in this episode and the next one. But the vast majority of these are going to be found in like a fecal oral kind of mode of entry into the body. So you're getting exposed to like fecal contamination somewhere, right?
yeah,
And that could be coming from animals, it could be coming from humans. And like there's also that ick factor with the poop mode of ingestion and like exposure that I think gives it that extra layer of ick.
yeah.
By the way, for the good people watching in video format, I did choose today's T-shirt based on that. It
Oh, yeah.
is, I have a T-shirt on that says "I've seen some shit," and it's a dung beetle on top of a big piece of dung. So I did choose that for today's episode because of the fecal oral kind of
Oh,
contamination route
excellent.
that's
I'm
so common.
glad
Yes. So you're welcome.
you didn't let this topic slip by without
No,
your dung beetle shirt. That's
no,
good.
I
Good on
went I
you.
went to my closet and I made this selection intentionally. But I think that going back to why it took us 226 episodes to cover this topic, and we've talked about this for years, right? Like we've mentioned this many times to each other off camera that, oh, we should probably do a parasite episode. But I think that the challenge, at least for me, is that it's another one of those situations where I feel like we are the monkeys in the middle and we have to sort of figure out where the truth lies. Because
Mm,
on the one hand, you have a lot of well intentioned, but I think misinformed people in the functional medicine, integrative medicine, naturopathic medicine, holistic, et cetera, kind of side of things, right? You have a lot of people over there who will tell you with a straight face, if you have a pulse, you have a parasite.
mm.
I don't remember who said that. There was like some famous integrative
Yeah.
MD on Instagram, like a woman, like a white woman. I don't remember her name, but she later got really, really into like methylene blue, I think. And that was like the cure all that she was promoting.
Yeah.
But I remember she in particular would kind of frequently say, if you have a pulse, you have a parasite. And then the implication also was that parasites are always bad and you need to treat them. And oh my God.
Yeah.
And like, it was sort of the overall vibe that I got from her before I unfollowed her, frankly, was everybody has parasites and everybody needs to be doing parasite cleanses periodically because you all have parasites. And it's like, I don't personally align with that. And,
Yeah.
the argument against that world too is that some parasites might be good for us. So even if you find a parasite as like an incidental finding on a stool test, do you actually need to treat it? And is it actually causing your symptoms? That's a whole can of worms,
Yeah.
pun not intended but acknowledged, by the way, that we might get into at some point here, especially as we talk about blasto. But like, if you have a pulse, you have a parasite, everybody needs to do parasite cleanses. Parasites are the cause of all your symptoms. Like, I don't align with that world. But then conventional medicine is sort of the opposite problem, where it's like they hardly acknowledge that parasites exist. Like you pretty much have to come back from Mexico with liquid profuse diarrhea for them to even consider a parasite test.
Right, right.
And it's like, I don't think that's right either. there's got to be some truth in the middle, but the middle between those 2 points is so vast and so confusing, and like this is a huge body of literature to try to cover. And so it was just like, this is a really big, messy, potentially controversial topic that we just haven't covered up to this point.
Yeah.
But here we are.
Yeah, I think you're right about it. And maybe it's just because we don't understand it as much as we do maybe. I feel like we're further along in microbiome research, understanding bacteria. Then you throw in like, parasites or even just like candida or fungus. Like I feel like that's another one we don't understand as much. But like we understand there's good and bad, and like commensal, just kind of their bacteria that aren't really causing any problems as long as they're kept in check. Like we understand kind of that there's an ecosystem of bacteria, but I feel like we lose that mindset a lot of times when we're talking about parasites and even like fungal stuff too, where it's like, oh, you have kidney. Oh my God, like this showed up on the stool test. And I think we lose the idea that this is an ecosystem and there could be benefits, there could be negatives to a lot of different microorganisms. And so I think that that's where it gets really tricky is maybe because we don't understand it as much, the research isn't as far along, there's sort of like a lot of doubt around it, which then, our patient population is going to probably be more scared. Like if someone hears if you have a parasite or if you have a pulse, you have a parasite, that's going to be like, I feel like if you're struggling with, GI symptoms, it could make you feel like, oh my gosh, maybe this is a possibility. Maybe this is the answer. I haven't gone down that road again. And it's like, there could be other very obvious things that you haven't covered, but you're getting in the weeds again of the microbiome, when in reality, so many other things upstream would probably help your symptoms. And even if there was a parasite,
is it causing your symptoms?
Right. Is it causing your symptoms? And I think you want to be looking at these upstream variables that are obvious. You want to put the cart before the horse, or no. What is it?
Horse before the cart,
horse
Amy.
Before the cart. Sorry, I got all messed up. You know what I meant. You want to be doing things in the right order. And I feel like people, because of the fear that's spouted all over the internet, they understand once you talk it through, like, oh, you might need to do this first before you go down the parasite road. But because the parasites kind of, I think, prey on fear and doubt, and like there's this influencer that I liked, and she's saying that I just feel like you can get very much distracted. There's so much noise. But most of the time, we see that working on other areas helps patients. And typically, again, parasites have not been... Usually, I've definitely seen cases of Giardia and outright infections where obviously treating the infection helps symptoms. But parasites haven't been this huge thing that I've seen clinically that's a big driver of symptoms for most of my patients, unless it's usually like an outright infection.
Same. Well, yes.
So that's probably why we haven't necessarily covered it. Maybe too, because we didn't want to like...
stoke the fire.
Right. Stoke the fire or be like, we're parasite people if you're wanting to, go down that rabbit hole or treat some random parasite.
That's actually a valid point that you bring up, maybe unintentionally, is like the reality of doing a podcast like this is that this is an arm of our marketing for each of our businesses. And we... when we put out episodes, those are going to be like the search terms that attract certain types of people, right? And like, I've told you for years, I have my own personal story with Lyme disease. I have my own professional opinions on Lyme disease. I will never do a Lyme disease video on my YouTube channel, and I will never do a Lyme disease episode on a podcast because I don't want to attract those people into my business. I don't feel like I'm the right person to help them.
Right.
And similarly, it's like the people who are super duper into parasites and like they're down that rabbit hole and they're, buying all the fancy cleanses and stuff. Like maybe we don't even want to attract people in that headspace into our world, quite frankly. Because again, like I think combination of I don't want to say we're not believers, but like compared to some of the folks out there, like we're really not believers in like it, the whole like, oh my God, everybody has a parasite model. And also, even if you did have a parasite, I don't know if I'm the best person to help you necessarily, because I haven't seen enough of it clinically to be like, oh yeah, I'm really good with parasites. But I digress.
Especially again, like a lot of the parasites, I'm just thinking of like the GI map, which we'll get into some of these parasites, but like where Nikki's laughing.
Tell me what you think about the GI map, baby.
Okay. But like you see it with the bacteria too, where they say, oh, these are opportunistic pathogens. So like they're basically labeling certain parasites as opportunistic pathogens too. That might not really be problems, But then there's a whole different category of outright pathogenic infections that, again, like I've had a decent number of patients with those, with crypto or Giardia. And it's like those, I feel like, okay, they treat it and then we do the same stuff that I do with all the patients about like building up their gut brain and building up their microbiome as a whole. So like
the foundation still matters.
Yes. And I think, again, where I think we don't align with maybe some of the more holistic people, like you were saying before, is in this gray, like these parasites that we really don't know that much about, that they're just kind of lumping into opportunistic pathogens because one study with one particular strain of that parasite was problematic.
Yeah.
In a gut that was already imbalanced. So it's like, it's all these variables that I think we don't really understand about parasites.
It's very messy and it's very confusing. And like, here's sort of my stance. If you do a stool test and you see a parasite on a stool test, I think it is perfectly reasonable to try to treat that thing once.
Yeah.
Maybe twice. You know what I mean? Like and this goes for anything, right? I don't care if it's a bacteria like Klebsiella. I don't care if it's, a candida thing that you're treating. I think it's perfectly reasonable, or SIBO. Hell, if you get a positive SIBO breath test, it is perfectly reasonable when you find something like that and you're suffering and you have symptoms. It's perfectly reasonable to try to treat the thing once or maybe twice. But if you're treating this thing repeatedly and you're not feeling better and maybe you're even feeling worse, at some point you have to question the validity of the test that you used, or if that thing is actually causing the symptoms that you're trying to treat.
Yeah.
And like those, we could spend a whole hour talking about that. Like I remember in the last maybe year or so that I was ordering the GI map for people, I remember that there was this guy who had chronic symptoms, I think diarrhea, if I remember correctly. And, he was either paraplegic or quadriplegic, I forget. I think it was a war injury. And I remember kind of talking to him and his wife about like, I think that this is probably more like neurological in nature.
Yeah.
Like the gut-brain connection isn't working right because of like the neurological injury that you've sustained and the fact that you're like, immobilized. But I had recommended that they go to functional neurology instead of me, but they were insistent. They're like, no, it's the microbiome. We've got to work with you. And I was like, all right. And so we did a GI map and it came back with like astronomically high levels of either Pseudomonas or Klebsiella. I forget which one.
Yeah.
But it was like 10,000 times the upper end of their range. And I was like, oh, okay, let's take a stab at this, I guess.
Yeah.
And we treated it and we even did a retest and the repeat test showed that it was gone, but he didn't feel any different.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, that might have either the first test was inaccurate, which is entirely possible with the GI fucking map.
Yeah.
Or that was present, but it wasn't actually causing his symptoms. And it was what they would call an incidental finding. Like, oh, yeah, we noted this, but it's not doing anything that we can tell. And so, it's like you have to question the validity of the test, or is the thing that we identified causing your symptoms? You might just have that thing and it might be getting along just fine in your ecosystem. But, again, I would say the same thing about parasites. I'd say the same thing with candida. Like you and I have both seen people who are bound and determined and convinced that they have candida, and they've done numerous candida treatments and protocols and diets. And you're like, so are you feeling any better? No, not at all. Worse.
Yeah.
And it's like, maybe you don't have candida, dude. Like maybe this is a different conversation.
Yeah. And I think that gets so wrapped up in just like the mental side of the doubts and like it's
the
so
desperation.
Hard to think
you want to feel
clearly.
better.
I think we've talked about this before when you're just feeling ill physically and then you're mentally have weird, like you're stuck mentally and you're just dysregulated. It's very hard to make progress with gut stuff if you're trying to do it on your own, where it's like, okay, I'm the leader of this ship and I'm making all these decisions, but I'm very dysregulated and frantic and urgent. And it's just that usually isn't going to end well. It's going to lead you down some rabbit holes. Typically, that's what we see. It's really, again, it's sad that happens. I think, again, it's I know I was there.
And it's understandable how that happens too.
During my gut journey, I feel like I was like totally desperado, clutching at straws with things, Well, I had that positive SIBO test. I treated it a bunch of times, but maybe it's still there. Maybe, I have this Proteus mirabilis on my stool test. Maybe it's that. Like, it's like you're clutching for anything instead of being able to like zoom out and kind of like see the whole picture. And that's where like our own little like fried adrenals gets us into trouble, I think, where we start going on rabbit holes and we're not necessarily seeing like clearly that, okay, we tried to treat that parasite and that didn't really help at all. So maybe that's not it. Maybe we can kind of go some other direction. I think sometimes, like, again, we just lock in.
Else. Yeah.
And it's really hard for us to like steer a different direction. I think the one story that always comes to mind when I think of parasites is I had a patient who was struggling with a lot of skin stuff and like more systemic stuff. I think she had some issues with energy. She tended to be she was a really active woman. I believe she was a mountain biker and just really lived a very active lifestyle. Nothing crazy, but she was definitely under fueling when we first started. Not by like a crazy amount, but definitely probably like maybe she was probably burning like 2,500 calories and eating like 2,000. So like just because she was so
decent,
active. So, but what really irritated was that she had like a little bit of a rash on her belly, like that she was trying to figure out what was going on. So I was just kind of trying to help just sort of build up some resilience in general. But she was working with another provider who was holistic. And first, this provider, she had a little bit of H. pylori on the GI map. So like not even above their limit. And so that provider was very adamant that it was H. pylori causing this rash. And I was like, I don't know. I don't know if that's true. Like if you want to do like a few H. pylori things like with this provider, I'm not going to like fight you on it. So she did like a H. pylori protocol with this provider. I don't think it was like the quadruple therapy. I think it was like herbs and stuff. So nothing like maybe as risky as like a quadruple therapy that might be relevant for someone that does have like a big H. pylori issue. So she did that, no change. So then this provider was really adamant that she had a parasite, even though no parasite showed up on the GI map. She was like, okay, it's a parasite. And I was just like, what?
Well, they're hard to test for, Amy.
I know. So it was like, and the recommendation was so extreme for not having clear data that there was an actual parasite. I think the Cellcore, because they recommended the whole like Cellcore line. It might have been 7 or 8 products. I mean, it had to be super expensive and for like 12 weeks. And I'm like, whoa, this is like a total, like a very long protocol that's expensive. And that's when I got a little bit more adamant with her. Like, there's so many other levers we could pull on for this rash that could be impacting the rash. And you haven't even really been fueling properly for that long. Like, I feel like they were jumping straight to more microbiome problems instead of, maybe we need to explore more micronutrients. Like, once you have gotten your calories up a little bit more, maybe we need to look at like vitamin A and like zinc and like some of these other like nutrients that might play a role in skin health. Or maybe we need to look at stress a little bit more. Or maybe we need to look at what detergent you're using. Like, again, it could be like so many different things that I feel like would be more relevant than going straight to a parasite that we have no indication is a problem. And I think that that's why it's frustrating in the holistic space, is because I do think sometimes providers can be super adamant with very little data.
Yeah.
Again, maybe even something does show up on a GI map, similar to what you were saying about the Klebsiella pseudomonas situation with that guy. It's like, okay, maybe, a little blasto shows up on this GI map, and like this person is totally adamant to go like all guns a-blazing with Cellcore for 12 weeks or something and really go after this thing, and then the person's not better. It's like, okay, well, now what?
And again, that's where I said, if you see a parasite on a stool test, doctor's data, Genova, whatever it might be, you have my full blessing to try to treat it once.
Yeah.
And if it makes an impact and you feel better, that's great. That's fantastic. You figured out something useful. But like, it's much, much, much more frequently we see the pattern. And I think that this is largely the case with candida and yeast stuff too.
Yeah.
Although I think it's to a lesser extent than parasites, but we see this pattern where somebody becomes convinced that they have a parasite for whatever reason, with or without testing, and they do a parasite cleanse and they're not feeling better. So they do a different parasite cleanse and they're still not feeling better. And so they do another one and another one. And like they either convince themselves or a well-intended provider convinces them that this is a really stealthy, sneaky parasite.
Yeah.
This one's just really tough. It's really stubborn. You have a hard case. We need to do it harder, better, faster, stronger. And it's like, they say these things. And, I think that so much of this is wrapped up in like the psychology of marketing, honestly. Like as a provider, like I just convinced this patient to spend almost $400 on a stool test. We'd better find something useful on there and justify the heck out of that expensive test. And I'd better be able to tie that test result with their symptoms, their pain point, why they came in to see me in the first place. And then, the first treatment didn't work. Well, shit. Now they have, again, pun intended, right? Like, oh, shit. Now they have the $400 stool test that they did. They've paid me for several appointments, which are usually not cheap in the functional space. They've spent $1 bajillion on the Cellcore line of products, right? It's like, it takes a lot and an uncommon amount of humility to tell the person, hey, maybe we're on the wrong path. Maybe this is not what you need. And maybe the last, $2,000 that you spent was actually in vain. Like it takes a pretty big person to be able to admit that versus saying, we need to double down. I know I'm right. I know that GI map was worth it. I know that we're on the right path. We're just going to do it more.
Yeah.
And like, unfortunately, people just, and again, like, I don't know how much of it is kind of like a business informed mentality of like, oh shit, this person's going to be mad that they wasted all this money and I'd better make the customer happy kind of mentality. I don't know how much of it is that versus people, the clinicians being really, truly convinced that they're on the right track clinically. I don't know how much is either one.
Oh, it's a really good point. I feel like there's so much, we're all human to a degree. Like, so there's so many different human elements that comes to working with a provider.
I mean, I know like as a lifelong people pleaser, I know those things have at least crossed my mind of like, oh no, like I have to be able to justify this test that we just did or whatever.
Yeah.
And again, so it's just, it's so messy. All of this is so messy. What I will say, kind of pivoting into something, maybe getting into something more along the lines of like research that we read to prepare for this episode.
Yeah.
I was surprised to see post-infectious IBS mentioned in articles regarding parasites. I think that, again, like this is, marketing and social media for you. When I think of post-infectious IBS, I have pretty much thought of that synonymously with CDTB, antivinculin, IBS Smart, IBS Check, like those kind of tests. And like the the anti-vinculin, like autoimmunity leading to SIBO, leading to, dysmotility, like that angle, which is, again, like very heavily promoted by Dr. Pimentel and his group, and like the IBS SMART test. Like you can go, they're on all of the SIBO summits, all the IBS summits. But like up to this point, when I've heard post-infectious IBS, I really thought it was a small number of bacteria that make cytolethal distending toxin that cross-reacts with vinculin. You get this autoimmune thing, and it can cause motility problems. And actually, what I was really surprised by is parasites might be bigger deal for post-infectious IBS. So like one study that I read in preparation for this episode, I think it was a meta-analysis looking at like post-infectious IBS, if I remember right. They estimated that about 30% of people who have parasitic infection go on to develop post-infectious IBS in the years following that infection, versus the same article estimated 18% post-infectious IBS occurrence in people with bacterial-based gastroenteritis. So like, that's actually pretty marked difference.
Yeah.
Much higher rate of post-infectious IBS if you have a parasite compared to a bacterial infection, which I thought was fascinating because that was kind of the opposite of what I was under the impression of.
Yeah. No, totally. I saw that too. Super interesting. Yeah, I think again, like what would be interesting to compare would be like the frequency of the parasitic infections versus the frequency of the bacterial infections, which would probably be hard to do because I feel like a lot of doctors aren't running stool test every time someone has like a GI infection per se.
Well, even for you, right? Like you and Armand have had food poisoning twice in the last couple of years, right?
Never did a stool test.
Never did a test. So you don't know what that was.
I know.
But yeah, it does. It makes you wonder, what the true incidence of some of these things are. But, I think parasites should be in the mix. It might be a different mechanism, right? It might not be that anti-vinculin, autoimmunity, dysmotility kind of thing that we see with the bacterial gastroenteritis, but it is interesting. I think that probably the biggest mechanisms that I could work out just across the board is, and I'll say too, like we both happen to research protozoal infections for this episode. So we're not even going to touch on worms yet. That's going to be the next episode that we do on parasites. But with these protozoal infections, like Giardia as a good example, they tend to cause leaky gut when they're acute. Like when you're acutely infected and you're dealing with the Giardia infection for, usually a period of like 1 to 3 weeks. They cause a heck of a lot of leaky gut. They basically, especially Giardia, it proliferates so much that it basically like crowds out or smothers the microbiome. And so you get this really, really profound wave of dysbiosis even after the infection is gone. And I think that's probably where a lot of this comes in, is like you get the acute infection and the dysbiosis, the leaky gut, and the inflammation that comes along with an infection. And I think some people's microbiomes are probably better able to adapt and repopulate and get back to normal. And some people are less able to do that. It's kind of like if everybody had to take an antibiotic right now, some people's microbiomes would be able to recover from that antibiotic more gracefully, and some people would go on to get C. diff.
Yeah.
It's like maybe the person's microbiome going into the infection, or factors like whether or not they have an appendix, they have that reservoir, like, or if they're taking,
or if they're sleep deprived because they have a young
or
kid,
like
or
the
they
quality
got
of their
stress.
diet. Are they getting fermented foods? Are they getting fiber? Are they getting diversity, polyphenols, whatever? Like there's probably some factors where some people's microbiomes bounce back and recover better and some people's do not. I think also, we've talked about leaky gut on this podcast before, and like nutritional factors and lifestyle factors that go into leaky gut. If you get a really bad case of leaky gut, but then your sleep is shit and your nutrition is shit and your microbiome is out of whack, like you might not be able to patch that up as quickly as somebody else. So I think similarly. And then I mentioned briefly inflammation and immune activation. I think an important facet of the immune system is that we want an immune system that is flexible and adaptable and able to mount a response. So you want an immune system that is capable of cranking out lots of inflammation. You want an immune system that is capable of, proliferating out and like attacking the bad guy. But you also want an immune system that knows when the threat has passed and can resolve the inflammation and can shrink the army back down and come back to a normal state.
Yeah.
And that whole idea of unresolving inflammation, or what sometimes is called chronic or persistent inflammation, is another whole ball of wax.
Yeah.
But
they're
again,
fighting like a phantom army that's gone.
Yeah. And it's the presence of the inflammation is not the bad, weird thing. It's the inability to flip the switch off. And there are a lot of nutritional and microbial elements to your ability to switch that off, right? If you have good microbes producing short-chain fatty acids in your gut, if you have diversity in your microbiome, like those are going to help you flip that switch off when inflammation does occur.
Right.
Nutritional factors like omega-3, omega-6 balance, and whether or not you're, replete in vitamins and minerals, those things are going to play a really big role in whether or not your immune system is skilled at flipping that switch off and turning off that inflammation. And if there's anything we can glean from the population at large, it's that probably the majority of people are not highly skilled at turning off inflammation once it begins. Right. And so you get this really inflammatory, immune-provoking event of a parasite infection, and then it's once you pop, the fun don't stop, and you're just inflamed after that. So I think those are the mechanisms by which these parasites can cause like a post-infectious IBS. Correct. You tell me your opinion on this, Amy.
Yeah.
I am of the opinion that a genuine, bona fide, chronic parasitic infection is not the mechanism by which these parasites could cause long-term symptoms.
Yeah.
I think it's the lingering effects of the acute infection that linger far after the pathogen is gone.
Yes.
That's
I agree.
My opinion, at least.
Yeah. I agree. I mean, I think again, even with bacteria, it might be a little bit of a different mechanisms, like you said, but I think it still comes down to being able to turn the threat off, like being able to get your immune system to read that you're safe and you need to be done fighting. And
stand down, man.
Yeah. So I think that is really interesting. And I agree about what you were saying to start this part of the conversation, just that parasites aren't really a part of that conversation with the like the IBS smart sort of situation where we usually are hearing post-infectious IBS and autoimmune SIBO, and kind of like that discussion is not really, the parasite piece is not really part of that.
Yeah. And you know what, honestly, I'm going to sound like a conspiracy theorist. Hold on. Do I still have my tinfoil hat? At some point, I made a tinfoil hat. Well, I have a real hat. So I'll put that on.
We need like Michelle Cavanaugh. We needed you to become a Michelle Cavanaugh. It's never going to happen at this point, but all the props ready.
I mean, I have a lot of weird stuff on my desk.
True.
I have a lot of props. I just happen to not have the tinfoil hat at my disposal. But anyway, let me just put on my imaginary tinfoil hat. And I don't think what I'm about to say is terribly controversial, but again, like the PI-IBS model of antivinculin antibodies leading to dysmotility, leading to SIBO, et cetera, right? Like I said earlier, that is largely being promoted, particularly in like social media and forums and summits and that kind of thing. That's largely being promoted by Dr. Pimentel and his group. And we've mentioned before, he does work for or with the company that makes rifaximin. And so it's sort of not surprising when you hear the guy speak, and he sometimes sounds like a little bit of a one-trick pony in the sense of everybody needs rifaximin, everybody has SIBO, just give them rifaximin, just give them more rifaximin and sprinkle rifaximin on top. And it's like, I think that there's the potential for a financial incentive to push the SIBO version of PI-IBS because that would lead to rifaximin prescription usage. Versus, again, if we're talking about parasites, which probably will not respond to an antibiotic, first of all. And second of all, we're talking about an infection that has come and gone. And now we are dealing with the repercussions, the wake that's left behind the boat, so to speak. There's no reason to prescribe rifaximin in this situation. So I think that's maybe part of why this hasn't gotten talked about as much within like the IBS SIBO community. Because right now in the IBS gut health in general community, SIBO is very much the it girl.
Yeah.
She's the Marilyn Monroe of her time. All eyes on her. We're all enamored with her. And who knows, maybe Parasites will be the next it girl after SIBO falls out of fashion. But for right now, for better or for worse, SIBO is the it girl. And so I think a lot of like the interest and the funding and the attention goes towards her. And, you know, and here we have a situation that maybe merits more attention, but just doesn't get quite the airtime. Or if it does get airtime, it's in like a really weird way.
Yeah.
Like, hey, buy these 12 supplements, take them for 12 weeks. That'll be $900.
Yeah.
And also parasites come out and breed on the full moon. So you'd better double your dose on the full moon. You know, it's like you get all these weird, like
it's very extreme.
Like hokey, like hokey weird theories. And like, I know we should get into the critters and we will momentarily, but can I tell you one more relevant story clinically?
Yes, please.
So I was just telling my husband this the other day. I was reminiscing. So one of my very first patients ever, literally, I think this was like the second patient I ever saw in clinical practice outside of like internships. The woman was the patient, the wife. She had fibromyalgia. And I remember her husband came into all of her appointments with her. And I thought, oh my God, that's so nice. He's so supportive. Yay, that's lovely. And she was very quiet and kind of, just kind of quiet. And a couple appointments into this relationship with this couple, I start realizing like, oh, this is kind of a weird dynamic actually. Like she's really quiet and kind of mousy and he's like very overbearing and very like controlling feeling. And like, oh, I don't know if he's here to be supportive per se. I think he's here because he like wants to be in charge and he wants to like, it's like it's a control thing. And I was like, this is a weird dynamic to be caught in the middle of. But I remember one day the husband brought the wife in and he was rambling on about grounding. Like that was the best thing ever he had ever heard about. He was reading a book. Jack Kruse, I think, was the author. Like he was reading this book and he was convinced we all had to do grounding. And he rambled on about that for a good long while. And I was like, I know nothing about this, sir.
Yeah.
But let's talk about that vitamin D level again. You know, like what I was kind of into with her.
Yeah.
And then the next appointment, he comes in and he's like, she has a parasite. I know it. I know she has a parasite. For a fact, that's what we're dealing with. And he said, good news. I found a protocol. We just need you to coach us through the protocol. And by the way, part of the protocol is I had to order a vial of Dead Sea salt water. It was shipped from whatever country the Dead Sea is in. I don't even know anymore. Somewhere in like Europe, right?
Yeah.
I had a vial of Dead Sea salt water shipped in.
Oh my God.
And that is part of the protocol. And we're going to pulse the anti-parasitics and we're going to do the Dead Sea salt water on the full moon because the parasites reproduce on the full moon. And we just need you to walk us through the parasite protocol. And I was like, whoa.
Whoa. Yeah.
Whoa.
Yeah.
And I was telling my husband, I was like, I tried to be nice and like tactful, I guess. But I kind of told him, I was like, I know nothing about this protocol that you brought in. I can't lead you through a thing that I don't know anything about.
Right.
So like, I'm not your girl. And also, I think I tried to thread in there a little bit. Like, also, I don't think she has a parasite, man. I don't think this is it in general. So like, it's a no on two levels. And I think that was the last time I ever saw them.
Yeah.
But yeah, you get some interesting interactions clinically when you start talking about parasites, I think.
Yeah.
And again, and that just makes it sort of harder to deal with because if you don't want to go down that crazy rabbit trail with the patient and you want to keep your mental faculties intact, it's like, again, where does the truth lie? It's we have two extremes like, parasites don't exist. Everybody has parasites and it's the full moon. And it's like, where is the truth?
Right.
But we have now danced around the intro to this episode for
Yeah.
40 minutes. So without further ado, I would like to suggest that we get into some of the critters. Now, we could go in any order. Do you want to lead us off with Blasto? Because I think that has the potential
Yeah.
to be an interesting part of the conversation.
Yeah. So Blastocystis hominis is, I feel like, a super controversial parasite. We're starting off with a banger. When I was doing research on it, it's the most commonly found parasite in stool. So again, if you are going to find a parasite, Blasto might be the most common one you would find. There's a lot of discussion on whether Blasto is a commensal, which is like basically microbes that kind of take up space in your gut. They're not necessarily like probiotic, where they're really good, or like pathogenic or doing anything bad. They're just kind of there taking up space, a part of your diverse microbiome. So people are arguing, is this a commensal, or is this potentially a pathogen that's doing damage in your gut and causing harm? So there is two kind of arguments going on. And I think when it comes to Blasto, what gets really lost is there's so many different elements to consider. One is the strains. There's 17 different strains of Blastocystis hominis. And it seems that strain 1, 2, and 3 are the most common. The ones that seem to be linked to more GI symptoms, like diarrhea, like kind of more pathobiont, so like they could become a little bit more pathogenic, type symptoms would be subtype 1 or strain 1, strain 4 and strain 7 have a little bit more data to be a little more problematic. So like strains 2 and 3 that are fairly common don't seem to be as linked to pathogenic type or symptoms, I should say. So like GI symptoms. So that's like huge. I think when we think of how are we making clinical decisions if Blastocystis hominis comes up on a stool test, it's like you really can't necessarily jump to the conclusion that it's pathogenic right away. Maybe I have heard that some stool tests do have strains. At least I've heard it discussed. Is it Genova? One of them, I feel like. Do you know this, Nikki?
So I was thinking about this right as you said this.
Yeah.
Doctor's data, last I knew, did not. GI map, last I knew, did not. There was a whole genome sequencing test that I ordered for a little while there. It was one of those direct-to-consumer tests. It was called Somagen,
Yeah.
with a silent P. P-S-O-M-A-G-E-N, I think. Somagen.
Mm-hmm.
I'm pretty sure they had it. I could be mistaking it, though. There's a test, again, it's a whole genome sequencing test out of Australia. I think it's called Microba.
Okay.
That one had it. And I think, if I remember correctly, Somagen was like the US branch of that company, which is why they had it. I believe that Somagen test is no longer around, or they might have rebranded.
Yeah.
But what was interesting is shortly before they kind of went away, they developed an add-on test that you could tack onto the GI effect with Genova. And I looked at one of those reports. It was basically the Somagen report, but it was just offered through Genova for a price hike.
Yeah.
So I think that might be the rub. I think that GI effects doesn't contain the subtypes, but if you do the add-on test, like the whole genome sequencing add-on test, I think that might have it.
Yeah.
I could be mistaken, but yeah, I think it exists. It is out there, but it's not super common in like functional stool testing quite yet.
Yeah. Well, and I think that the key takeaway is that there are a lot of people that have Blastocystis hominis and have zero gut symptoms. And some are like, they even link some people with Blasto as having very diverse guts. Like it can sometimes be a marker of diversity in like a healthy microbiome that you have Blasto.
I was going to say too, I tried to pull up the notes, but I can't find them at the moment. I took a class from Jason Hagerlach, the probiotic advisor, years ago on Blastocystis. And I remember at the time he brought up the strain thing. And he even brought up the idea that some research is starting to say that maybe Blasto is like an apex predator in the
Yeah.
ecosystem. And again, it was kind of, I think, chalked up to, if you went into a natural ecosystem like Yosemite and if you took out all of the wolves and all of like the carnivores, the apex predators,
Yeah.
you would think, oh, yay, now everybody can get along and it'll be rainbows and happy schmappy and glitter and unicorns. But what ends up happening is the things that the wolves used to eat
Right.
go bananas. Now you have like 10 times the amount of deer, 10 times the amount of squirrels, 10 times the amount of whatever. And now the plants that those animals eat cannot support them. So a lot of the animals become sickly and they like die off or they get diseases because the boom in the population and the plant eaters is not supported by the plant, the trees and the species that are available for them to eat. And so actually the apex predators are really helpful in these ecosystems. Like if you were to drop ship the wolves back into Yosemite, it's really helpful because they're picking off the old, the dying, the sick, the injured. And it's oftentimes they're picking off the animals that are not as fit to reproduce and pass on their genes. And so those, the deer species or the rabbits or whatever are much healthier overall with the apex predator in place. And I think that he mentioned that Blasto might even be like an apex predator in the gut microbiome, which I thought was really, really interesting.
Yeah, there's some of the consensus of the papers that I was reading too is, the environment matters so much. And so the strain matters probably, and it's hard to again say Blasto is good or bad. It's like there's so much nuance here. So the strain probably matters, but the environment that it's living in matters so much. And some of the papers were saying that like some people with IBS, it might be just like a marker of dysbiosis, that the things got out of whack, and then that allowed maybe Blasto to overgrow to a and kind of maybe the strain's more problematic. So basically, typically, it doesn't have virulence factors or things that you would see from an outright pathogenic parasite like Giardia, which we'll get into. So it doesn't really have as much of those virulence factors. It kind of has subtle ones at different, like there was one paper that said like, oh, it exhibited kind of a virulence factor, like in this certain situation. So it was like when the environment was weird, it displayed different characteristics.
Well, it behaves differently, right? In a different environment.
So yeah, I think, the key being that, the environment still really matters. Like someone could have Blasto and their microbiome's well balanced and really diverse, and the Blasto is just a key part of the ecosystem. And then someone else who, maybe they took a round of antibiotics, maybe they got exposed to Blasto during that time or something like that, and it kind of had its way with their microbiome and could kind of like overgrow and do things that it shouldn't. Kind of like some of the other commensals that are bacterial. It's like, okay, E. coli is fine. Maybe if it overgrows, it could be problematic. Do you know what I mean? Stuff like that.
Well, yeah, and sorry to interrupt you, but I think it goes back to this idea that we've mentioned before, but not in this episode yet, is that we are still in our infancy. Like we as a human species are still in our infancy of understanding the microbiome just overall. So whether we're talking about bacteria or yeast or parasites or viruses, that's a whole nother thing that we haven't even looked at, is like the bacteriophages and the viruses that infect the bacteria in the microbiome. But we're so like in our infancy in this field of study, and we will be probably for the rest of our lives. Like I don't think we're going to know everything about the gut microbiome within my lifetime even. But we have these commercial products like functional stool testing, and the presence and the marketing of these functional stool tests far outpaces where the science is.
Yeah.
Like we have so many stool tests that we can choose from, and we can get this data, but like what do we do with that data, and how useful and how clinically useful is still up for grabs. And so we have yet to identify what the perfect ideal microbiome looks like. And believe me, they've been trying. They've been trying to
Right.
pin that down for years. And their studies on virtually every disease at this point try to compare the microbiome of people with IBS versus healthy controls, the microbiome of people with fibromyalgia versus healthy controls, the microbiome of people with cancer versus healthy controls. You name it, atherosclerosis, whatever it might be, like every disease process, they're trying to pin down how the microbiome in that disease state is different from healthy normals. But the problem is we have yet to really identify what a healthy normal microbiome looks like. And probably that's going to look different for individuals. Like genetically and environmentally, I'm different from you living in Ohio. And like eating, like your environmental exposures, your health history, your antibiotic use history, way you were born, or if you're a breastfed, like there's so many factors. My ideal microbiome that makes me feel healthy and confers benefit to me, the host, is going to be different from your ideal microbiome versus the person listening to our podcast right now. But, these stool tests have to put something down, right? They have to assign a number. They have to tell you, oh, we want this thing below this number. Otherwise, it's bad and overgrown. But like, I just had a conversation last week with a student, and she was very confused because basically the short story is she came in and she's like, I'm feeling so much better. My diet has broadened out a ton. I can eat almost everything now. I'm not having bloating or distension anymore. I'm not having constipation. I'm pooping every single day. I feel I have better energy and mental clarity. Like I feel so much better. ... However, she happened to get a new stool test done just for fun. A biome site, 16S, kind of like the European equivalent of us doing, like the ombre test, right? She got a new 16S stool test in, and her method of Brevibacter is higher than ever. Higher than when she even started.
Oh my God, yeah.
And so she's like, how do I reconcile these two things? Like, I feel so much better, but this number is looking worse.
Right.
And that was the thing that set her down this path, is like chasing this methane producer.
Right.
And we had a long talk about like, I don't know, man, like I would just be happy that I feel better, and I would ignore the test to some extent. But it's like, maybe for the majority of people, you want method of Brevibacter below a certain number, but maybe for you, it's okay, like neutral or even protective. I don't know. But it's like the damnedest thing. And you have to have these real life moments where you're like, all right, what do I do with this data? Is it actually helping me to get more data, or is it just confusing me and clouding my judgment and freaking me out for no reason?
Yeah. Well, and I think your point about not knowing what the ideal microbiome is very important. I think the one thing that we do seem to know is that diversity is super important. So like if you're going to focus on one thing for your microbiome health, is to try to do things that increase diversity. I feel like it's maybe the one like protective data point that seems like pretty established. It's like, okay, the more diversity, it seems to be more protective against chronic issues.
I also think you want some of the good protective genre to be there. I don't know if we know the quantity yet, but like Akkermansia, Faecalibacterium, and Lactobacillus, and Bifidobacteria, like, Roseburia, I think that you want them to be there. I don't know if we can really definitively say how much Bifido is ideal versus how much Akkermansia is ideal. But I think you want them to be there, certainly.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think you're dead right. Yeah.
But beyond that, I don't know. So the rambling point to come back to Blasto is there might be ecosystems where Blasto is actually a favorable thing for that ecosystem, and it's like helping it somehow. There might be ecosystems where Blasto could be a bad thing, or it's like genuinely overgrown or genuinely more like aggressive, I guess. I don't even want to say virulent, but I'll say like aggressive. And there could be a lot of situations where it's just neutral and it's just chilling out and it's not contributing tremendously one way or another. But the point we're kind of circling is that when you get Blasto back on a stool test, generally speaking, you don't know. You don't know if it's good, bad, or neutral for you as an individual, which takes me back to the point. if you see a parasite on a stool test, by all means, you can try to treat it once and just see what happens. But I wouldn't lose your shit, pun always intended, chasing after it repeatedly and like
Yeah.
killing yourself trying to kill this thing because you don't know what it's doing in you and it might not be that bad.
Yeah, and I will say, so there is some data um, when I was looking through the papers, because the question becomes, there were certain research articles that pointed out that people with IBS had a slightly higher prevalence of blasto compared to healthy controls. There were also studies that contradicted that, where like healthy controls had higher prevalence. One study showed that 52% in one study of healthy controls had blasto versus 39% of IBS. So again, 52% is a lot. It's a huge percentage of that population. It might have been from a different country, I'm guessing, as well. Like maybe I think that one might have been like Iran, maybe. So again, they have a little bit of a higher prevalence in that study, but you know, so even if there was a higher prevalence in IBS, like if we just assume that the other study was better, which again, who knows? But if we just assume that people with IBS might have a little bit higher prevalence of blasto, does treating actually help the symptoms? So it's really interesting is it seems like it does, but then some of these studies will actually look at the eradication and they'll show like the symptoms are improved, but it's not eradicated. Does that make sense? So
Yeah.
there is like some argument around like, could it be doing some other things? Like, is it pruning back maybe some other microbes? Like, is it helping with the SIBO situation? Like, could it be doing other things that make it more helpful? So it's hard to know with this in terms of like, does treatment actually help? And it could help certain people, and maybe the blasto is problematic, kind of what you were saying. Like,
Yeah.
if you have this positive test and you want to try something, like give it a shot. But it is interesting that like it does seem like blasto is one of those things that like is hard to totally eradicate, or there's like some people where it still kind of lingers and maybe it's not as
Maybe
problematic.
that's okay.
Yeah, right. So, but that was really interesting. The other one that was kind of interesting with the blasto was that there was a study where they looked at if metronidazole versus Sac-B was better for outcomes, like which one worked best for blasto, and the better outcomes were with the probiotic. So that was really kind of fascinating too. Again, I don't know if every situation that would be true, but could also be like a lower risk option to try if you feel like you want to do something for blasto, but you don't want to go all in on like metronidazole. You could try Saccharomyces boulardii as a probiotic option. Or other
Yeah.
probiotics. Like, again, I doubt that other probiotics have necessarily been tested against blasto, but maybe certain other probiotic strains would work too. We just don't have
Yeah.
the data.
Which again kind of circles back to the idea that the rest of the ecosystem matters very
Yeah.
much, right? And like thinking of Saccharomyces boulardii specifically, that's one of those probiotics that has really good, robust research in preventing or decreasing the incidence of antibiotic-associated C. diff and antibiotic-associated diarrhea.
Yeah.
And so it seems to have a stabilizing effect on the microbiome and like protecting some of the good guys. And, you know, it makes you think, okay, even if the blasto was problematic, could it become unproblematic in the presence of more good guys and more like stabilizers like Saccharomyces?
Yeah.
And again, like, do you really need to get rid of this quote unquote bad guy? Or is the real problem, like the thing causing your symptoms, a lack of other good guys in the vicinity?
Yeah.
And I think you're right. I think that just because we haven't researched other strains and other probiotics for this purpose, that might not count them out. It's just we happen to have some research on this particular probiotic.
Yeah.
So like, you know, if you're a Benton kind of person, you might as well try that one first.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, I feel like blasto in particular it's so big in the functional medicine
Yeah.
space. I think that Blasto was having more of a moment before SIBO came onto the scene. I feel like that, because I remember going to, like the IFM GI course or like functional medicine GI based courses years ago, like, 10, 12, whatever years ago. And I feel like that was a big topic at the time, was like, oh,
Right.
here's a doctor's
Blasto.
data stool test and we found Blasto, and like, oh, you got a new kid. And I feel like it's not as commonly talked about now that SIBO is on the scene, because again,
Yeah.
she's kind of like the it girl at the moment, but you still do see this, especially when you get into like the functional stool testing kind of world. Like, but again, it's like you throw enough darts and you're going to hit something eventually.
Yeah.
If you just do stool testing on every patient, you're eventually going to find Blasto. You're eventually going to find some of this stuff. But again, is it an incidental finding, or does it actually mean something clinically to that patient and their symptoms? That's what we're trying to grapple with. And the long and short of it is I don't think we know.
Yeah.
But that's where I keep going back to. If you want to treat it once, by all means, try. It's just don't get like super sucked into it, and don't get into, some of the crazy bullshit about like, oh, you have to treat it on the full moon and all of that nonsense.
Yeah, I feel like that's generally good advice from like be open to experimentation and to adjust. If you feel like you are really down a rabbit hole and you've been there for a while and you really need to redirect. People also really struggle with oh my God, now what was it? Is it opportunity cost? It's like an economic term. We might have talked about it before.
Yep.
But it's like if you are building a building on a college campus, I still remember this example, and then you like realized you put the pipes in wrong and you've built like this huge building. But if you continue building it and just like repair the pipes, it'll cost more than if you just tore it down and restarted. Like most people will still have the urge to like save what they built. Like they worked so hard on building this building, but they did it incorrectly. And instead of like saving the money and time by just knocking it all down and starting over, they'll still like persist and like try to fix it, and just so it doesn't look like a loss. I think we do that a lot in the IBS like world and trying to get better. It's like
I think humans do that just in general.
There were probably years in my journey that were a total loss, but I was like unwilling to just say like I was down the wrong path, because that would mean that I wasted my time and energy.
Yeah.
Well,
humans have a hard time admitting that, honestly.
Yeah.
Here's a good quote actually that came up. So I was just at an herbal medicine conference on the weekend, and this was on one of the slides, and I happened to be able to find it here. So one of the quotes that was on a slide that I enjoyed was, "I have no data yet. It is a capital mistake to theorize before one has data. Insensibly, one begins to twist facts to suit theories instead of theories to suit facts."
Yeah.
And that is apparently a Sherlock Holmes quote. But I love the bit about you will start to twist the facts to suit your theories instead of building theories that suit the facts. And I think that can be what happens here, is like people get so utterly convinced that they have candida, they have a parasite, they have SIBO. They'll look for any little fragment and scrap that supports their version of the truth instead of being open-minded to changing their mind.
Yeah.
And again, and it's like, it's a really hard pill to swallow when you realize that you've sunk so much money and time and effort into this path, and it was the wrong path.
Yeah.
That's a really hard thing for people to admit, but it is what it is. To that point, I would like to reciprocate now with a little bit on Giardia. This is the one that I took on for us today. And then I'll probably briefly cover Cryptosporidium, because I know we don't want to make this like a 2-hour episode.
Do you want to do that in the next installment? Do you think?
Well, we still have to cover worms and testing though. So I could go either. I could try to make Giardia a little bit snappy. And what I will say though first, if I may, is that I snorted when Amy mentioned the GI map. And because a lot of you know this story already, but I think I unearthed some discrepancies and some issues with the GI map some years ago. I published it on my YouTube channel, and then the bastards threatened to sue me, and I had to take the video down. That's the short version of the stressful story. The lead up to that, where like I had my suspicions with that test for several years running up to that point. But the thing that really got me to do the split sample testing and investigate it further was I had a string of like 5 or 6 patients, all that were supposedly diagnosed with Giardia. And they were all over the country, different states. But I remember it very vividly. The first test came back in with Giardia, and I was like, oh, damn. Oh my God, we need to treat this. Holy crap. And like, we had this conversation of, okay, we're going to treat this. And it's, very important. And then the second one came in, and I was like, whoa, what are the odds? That's crazy. 2 in a row. Okay, same conversation. We've got to treat this, Giardia, yada, yada, yada. And then the third one came back. And I was like, huh. Okay. And, I had a conversation, but I had that little asterisk in it of like, we're going to treat this. Just FYI, like, I'm like a little bit skeptical, but we're going to treat it anyway. And then the fourth, and then the fifth, and then the sixth one came back in. And by the time I got to the last one in the string, I think there was 6. By the time I got to the last one in the string, I told the person, I was like, I don't think you have Giardia. And I was like, I don't think this is it. It's up to you if you want to try to treat it. I gave her some options, but I was like, I told her, I said, you are the 6th person in a row, all who supposedly have Giardia. And at this point, I don't buy it. And that was what made me really suspicious of the GI map, was actually Giardia. So anyway, what I kind of read more so about it. So Giardia is another protozoal infection. So it's a little single-celled organism, like Blasto, like Cryptosporidium. What I thought is interesting is that I usually think of Giardia as like pretty severe diarrhea and bloating and abdominal pain. And that can happen, but about 50% of Giardia infections are asymptomatic, which is kind of wild. You wouldn't think of like an overt pathogen like that being asymptomatic. But yeah, 50% of people will have no symptoms from Giardia infection. What I thought it was interesting too is that Giardia gets this reputation of being a really, really bad pathogen. And it can be if you're immunocompromised or very young or very old. But one of the things that sometimes gets talked about is villus atrophy, which is seen in like celiac disease. It's seen sometimes in like very, very severe cases of SIBO. And it's like the ultimate leaky gut. Well, what's interesting is about 96% of people with Giardia have normal villus structure. So villus atrophy or like lymphocyte white blood cell infiltration into the villi is actually pretty uncommon with Giardia. And these are the people who like have symptoms and they go and seek a diagnosis and they get testing for it. So it's pretty uncommon to see the villus atrophy piece with Giardia, which I was surprised by. I feel like that came up in school as like something that happens with Giardia. Interestingly, there was one paper that looked at risk factors, and they said male sex was associated with higher incidence of not only Giardia, but virtually every other parasite, which I thought was really interesting. And, they chalked it up to a couple of different things, like maybe it's like an occupational exposure hazard, like if you're working on a farm or you're around certain chemicals, my brain immediately went to, well, yeah, men are knuckleheads and they do dumb shit, right? Like if you picture, and again,
like
it's
they buy
fecal,
nickel like tacos on the side of a road.
Yes, stuff like this.
Yeah,
like
this is what happened to my husband's friend who always like travels and hikes and stuff, and he got a horrible GI infection because he had nickel tacos on the side of like a road in a third world country.
Seems like a bad idea.
Okay.
To any woman.
Right. So.
Well, or like I'm picturing too, because fecal oral exposure is the main route of transmission. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you're like eating poop, although certainly that would do it. But oftentimes Giardia, a lot of the exposure comes from like you're camping and you're drinking the water and like you didn't boil the water enough, or you drank some creek water, which is a bad idea. Go back to episode 1 of our podcast if you want more on that. But you're like drinking water out in the wilderness, you're getting you're at like a park, a cabin, a campsite, etc. That's one of the big modes of transmission. And that water supply, for whatever reason, happens to be a little bit contaminated, maybe from other campers, maybe from water processing plants or whatever. But similarly, I'm just picturing like sometimes like I think men are a little bit more campy and like outdoorsy in that sense.
Or they're like, oh, we'll drink the water at the resort.
Yeah, the creek looks clean.
Fine. Yeah.
The creek looks clean. We'll just drink that. And like, and I'm picturing them like out on a lake, like, with like the inner tube on the back
Oh
of
my
a
God.
motorboat,
Have
and
you seen-
they're beefing it. They're just like pommeling their friend into the lake and
Oh
getting
my
a
God.
mouthful of water and a nose full of water because they're just eating it repeatedly on that
Oh my God.
motorboat, and the friend driving the boat is drunk and they're laughing their asses off. I'm just picturing like
Yeah,
just dumb men doing dumb men shit.
you need to look online. There's a show called Platonic with Seth Rogen and Rose Byrne, and
Okay.
they're like best friends, but one's a girl and one's a boy. And so, Rose Byrne character is like a mom, and Seth Rogen's character is kind of like this, wild, eccentric friend, and he wanted to go kayaking down the LA River. And so, like, the guy's like, by all means, do not like get it anywhere near any hole of your body, like not your eyes, your.
Yeah.
And so they
no.
go down, and like Seth Rogen's character and then her other friend, they were like splashing each other, and she's like, oh my God. And then
Yeah,
at
yep.
the end of the episode, they're
Sounds
like, oh,
about
that
right.
was so much fun. And they like just projectile vomit. Like, but it's like, oh, that would be something like
Sounds about right.
a guy would do. It was so funny. My mom and I were dying watching it.
Somebody who I used to ride my bike on a bike path on the LA River,
Yeah.
and like, ew,
Yeah.
ew, no,
Yeah.
no. Anywhu, so
Yeah.
so male sex is associated with
Interesting.
higher infection with virtually all the parasites, including Giardia, which I thought was hilarious.
Yes.
And then there seems to be a little bit more like regionality. Like in particular, the Southeast United States had more Giardia cases compared to like other quadrants of
Yeah.
the country. Like it wasn't astronomically higher, but it was significantly higher. And I thought that was interesting. Now, do you want to hear something kind of interesting, piling one more time on the male sex
Yeah.
thing? So in a different paper talking about post-infectious IBS and parasites, there was a section where they outlined factors associated with higher risk of post-infectious IBS. And so it's like, yeah, we said 30% of people who get a parasite infection could go on and develop PI-IBS down the road. But what makes up the difference between the 30% who do and the 70% who don't? The things that were outlined, at least in this study, they said, generally speaking, younger age, female sex, antibiotic exposure, severity of initial infection, prior mental health diagnoses, somatization, and Giardia infection that required more than one treatment. So refractory
Yeah.
Giardia infection. And so what's interesting is it seems that men get parasite infections more frequently than women, but women have a little bit more of a tendency to get PI-IBS.
Yeah.
Now, again, is that because of a hormonal thing? Is it because of like concomitant mental health diagnoses like anxiety and depression? Is it because of, antibiotic exposure? Is it something else?
Right.
I don't know. But I thought it was interesting that like men get more parasites,
Yeah.
but women tend to get more of the PI-IBS from
Right.
parasites.
Like
it
longer
seems.
term issues.
Yeah, so that was a fascinating little journey to
Yeah.
go on. But going back just briefly, I'll share again, mode of transmission. A lot of it's going to be it's fecal oral contamination is the route, but within that, like almost half of that comes from water exposure, and it's mostly like you're outdoors and you're doing something outdoors. It's like a lake, a creek, you were camping, you were backpacking, you were hiking, you were at a cabin, and there was contaminated water, and you drank that and got infected. Person to person transmission is the other one that makes up again just under half of Giardia cases. And what was interesting is that almost all of them were either in childcare centers like preschools or houses that had young children under the age of 5. And again, if you think about like cleanliness and hygiene,
Yeah.
like if you've ever had a little kid, right? Like little kids, oh my God, Jess used to scratch her butt
Yeah.
and then she would go and do whatever. And we're like, and we would try to stay on top of her of, being mindful of that. But, like kids just, one time when Jess was like 1.5, I kid you not, she went to poke her finger in the dog's butthole and
Yeah.
we just barely caught her in time. Like what possessed her to do that? Just right in there.
Yeah.
And so anyway, kids are gross.
Yeah.
But young children, that's another route. And then less frequently, but still does happen, food contamination sometimes will happen. And they said that it tends to be foods that are eaten raw or like with no processing. You know, it's like the plants were watered with contaminated water and then you didn't wash the plant off, like the spinach or whatever, and that's how you got it. And then my last point on Giardia is that this, and I forgot this, the CDC recommends that you don't go swimming and you don't have sex for 2 weeks after the diarrhea has subsided from Giardia. Yeah. So if you think about it, if you have the infection and you're having the diarrhea for like 1 to 2 weeks, there's another 2 weeks that you shouldn't be swimming and you shouldn't be having sex, according to the CDC. Now, the men in the room are all like, 4 weeks without sex. But the idea is like you don't want to continue shedding it and passing it on, right? Like that lake water, that pool water is still brushing up against your little butthole. And you'd better hope you wiped real good and got all that Giardia off for those other pool goers or whatever it might be.
You're really painting a picture.
I am. But, you know, it's think about how many people know that and how many people would actually adhere to that advice. It's no wonder we're reinfecting each other left and right. It's because probably nobody is going to abstain from those two things.
Everybody's
for 2
having
weeks.
sex and swimming in pools.
And maybe at the same time.
Yeah. Oh, God.
Well, and what's funny is with Giardia specifically, it seems like it's less so the chlorinated pools and such. Don't worry, I don't have as much on this one. For Cryptosporidium, little, protozoal friend of the others, that one, the main mode of transmission is water, but it's mostly in pools and kiddie parks and swim parks and like splash pads and kiddie pools and chlorinated kind of areas. And then to some extent, you could get person-to-person contact, like childcare facilities came up. You can, Cryptosporidium also comes up with exposure to cattle. So I guess cattle must be like a vector or something for it. But exposure to cattle or contact with cattle is another one. The other big one for Cryptosporidium, the main one being the water contamination issue. But the main one with Cryptosporidium, aside from that, was unpasteurized food. So particularly unpasteurized dairy and unpasteurized apple cider. The latter surprised me more. I have not gotten on the raw milk bandwagon personally. I think I'm keen to keep pasteurizing it personally. You do you, whatever you want to do, listener. But I remember learning enough in my microbiology classes in undergrad and grad school that I don't do-si-do with that personally. And this is one microbe. Why? But the thing is, there was decent enough evidence that Giardia infection can lead to post-infectious IBS. Cryptosporidium, it's actually a little bit more common than Giardia, so it seems, in the United States at least. But I couldn't really find anything definitively linking PI-IBS to Cryptosporidium. I saw some papers where they theorized it, and they said that it's plausible, but I didn't see any where it was like really solid evidence that this is a thing. So this one might not be quite as important to our listeners. But, it's out there. It's still there. You got to be careful with it. But can I throw your state under the bus slightly?
What's the matter with Ohio?
There was a heat map of where Cryptosporidium is more so diagnosed. And believe it or not, Ohio and, hold on, what was the other one? Minnesota? So they made a point of saying that the Great Lakes area was where you get most of the outbreaks. Yes. Okay. So Minnesota and Ohio led the numbers. This study was from 2012 to 2017, I think, was the date range. But Ohio and Minnesota had the most cases of outbreaks. Followed, then the next bracket down was Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Illinois, Iowa, and Florida. And they mentioned specifically, like, kind of seems to cluster more around the Great Lakes for whatever reason. Now, I will say New York didn't have that many. The heat map.
Why do we always win the worst categories? I feel like
maybe
we never win anything fun. But
you have jungle gyms, And
Oh, that is true.
So
We
that
do
makes
have
up for it.
Armand and Cece went there yesterday, so
That was a magical place. So I'm okay with the state of Ohio. I am.
yeah.
But I just wanted to throw you under the bus a little bit because, there was like the heat map with the different states, and there was two that stuck out pretty clearly, and one of them was yours.
Yeah.
And you have germy little children under your roof, so just be careful with those little germ
And
buckets,
you know
man.
what? I don't know if we've told this story. I know we've been going on for a while, but Frankie is a notorious bath pooper. Notorious. She's probably pooped in the bath 10 times.
Oh no.
All probably in the last like 3 or 4 months. She's been so bad lately.
She's just
I
on a
thought
kick.
Armand was gonna cry. I don't think I've ever seen him so upset. She pooped in the bath, and they get a bath together, Cece and Frankie. So like Cece knows now to like jump out really fast. She'll be like, "Pam." So Cece jumps out. Then I got Frankie out. I'm like, Armand, come up here. So like I'm like, take him to the shower to like clean them up a little bit.
Yeah.
But then he like was getting the shower ready, and Frankie proceeded to continue to poop all across the carpet, like kind of like looser, like not well put together poops. It was like the end of the road.
God.
She did like one big turd in the bathtub and then made like
my
a trail, and I thought Armand was going to like die.
Oh no.
He was like, this isn't gonna come out, and I'm like, it's gonna come out of the carpet. Like I'm not worried about this at all. But it took me like an hour and a half to clean up because it was just like she like stomped it all through our like carpet in our bedroom, and I'm like, oh my God.
No.
But yeah, I'm always like
My
scooping
husband,
out
too,
the poop with the pitcher and then putting it into the toilet, and then I have to
my
like
God.
disinfect everything. All their toys are in the bathtub too, and you're just
Of
like,
course.
oh my God.
Oh my God.
It's
Well,
crazy.
Well, if any of your family happened to get profuse watery diarrhea lasting up to
Okay.
3 weeks, I might eyeball Cryptosporidium.
Yeah.
Not gonna
that's
lie.
actually good
Like
to know.
That might be it.
to know.
Although again, Giardia's still on the table for little kids, but ew, just
Yeah.
ew. Well,
That is true. It's gross.
I don't know what better grand finale for this episode I could possibly think of other than pooping in the bathtub and cleaning up poop for an hour and a half.
Right.
That seems pretty on the nose for the IBS Freedom podcast.
Yeah.
But as you can tell, people, this ended up being a very big topic. We knew it was going to
Yeah.
be, but it is what it is. We're here now. So this was part 1 of the parasite conversation. Like I said, we haven't even thought of the worms yet. And that's a whole nother ball of wax to get into. So the next parasite episode, we will talk a little bit about testing for parasites, and we will talk a little bit about the wormy worms, and maybe, whatever other tidbits strike our fancy between now and then. But I hope that you all stay worm-free, parasite-free, reasonably. And I hope that you can sleep at night and that this episode didn't give you nightmares. So until then, doodaloo!